There. Hey, everybody. It's Thursday night. Welcome to our Bible Discovery group. We'll give everybody a moment to tune in. Tonight, we are going to begin chapter 21, Book of Exodus, chapter 21.
We're over here on live.exclaim.org as well. And the new church site will be 14.6. So it's 14six.church.com, I think.
And you can do .org too.
Yeah,
but the
anyway.
The important part is
Carolyn, Angie, Brian, y'all logging in.
14SIX 14:6, which stands for John chapter 14 verse 6, but the logo is 14SIX, and I think you can type in .org, .church. I think they all work right now. So that's
We
what
think
we got.
so.
We think so, but we don't know.
I'm going to try to bring it up on my phone here so I can see what's going on.
All right. So we're
Let me turn this down.
trying to make sure
Catherine
all
Coleman,
of the
it
screens
says,
are
is watching. Hi, Catherine.
So I see Miss Carolyn's on board. Hi.
Let me go down to the new
I
comments.
see Angie's on board. I see Brian's on board. Hello.
Hi,
Hello,
guys. How are
everybody.
you?
Jay's looking at another screen, and it says that Miss Catherine's on board from Texas.
I see you on here.
Oh, there you are.
There, I see you on there.
All right.
Thank you.
So, well, thank you all for joining
Sorry.
us. So,
I'm looking at too many things.
hope everyone had a safe and relatively
This is what it
sane
takes.
4th of July.
Yeah.
We-
It was insane at our house.
It was,
but
yeah, not
because of us, but
not at our house in
our
particular,
neighborhood.
but our neighborhood was
I'm starting to feel
over the top.
I'm starting to feel like we're being held hostage every 4th of July in a war zone in Stanton, California,
Yeah,
where
it
we
was
live.
bad.
They are illegal.
It was bad.
Fireworks are illegal. The aerial fireworks are illegal, but for over 4 hours, it's literally, they're exploding over our house. It sounds like they are definitely launching them very close to our house.
Oh, yeah.
And, this year is the first time I really felt like, it's so selfish of people to do that. I mean, I get it if you want to definitely
Lamont.
celebrate the country and, and you're patriotic and you want to celebrate this country. I'm all for that. But for 4.5 hours,
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
and if people have animals that are afraid of those noises,
Yeah.
you're literally torturing some people and animals for 4.5 hours.
So where we live, we can see Disneyland and we can see Knott's Berry Farm fireworks.
Robin's watching and your mom's watching.
And I have to tell you, Knott's Berry Farm, in comparison to what our neighbors were setting off,
yeah.
Knott's Berry Farm actually looked pretty amateurish.
Oh, yeah.
I can't even imagine how many thousands of dollars went up in smoke.
They
So,
literally had the full-on big fireworks, the big exploding, beautiful, sparkly ones. I mean, they are pretty, but I don't enjoy being right underneath where they explode. That's all.
right. And
I like to see them from a distance.
the neighbors did set a palm tree on fire.
Oh, yeah. The fire department came out.
Thanks to the Orange County Fire Department. They knocked
Yes.
it down quickly.
Thank you, Orange
We're
County
grateful for that.
Fire
But
Department.
Anyway, so we had an adventurous 4th of July, I need to
Yeah.
say. Lamont Bondman's on.
Lamont,
Good
hey,
to
guys.
see you.
How
Good
are
to
ya?
see you tuned in. So, and Miss Robin is here.
And Robin,
So thank you for joining us.
little
So-
Baghdad.
So, yeah. So, does that mean it's hot?
Are you in a very hot place?
Yeah.
Oh my
so-
goodness.
But okay. Tonight, Exodus 21. We've got a ton
let's
of
change
information.
this.
Ton of information
you
to
can put
cover.
it
We're
over
going to
here.
go ahead and put up our
There we go.
screen
Split
here.
screen. The teaching
And
screen.
Buckle up
Kind of the
because
teaching
we've got
screen.
a ton of
good to see you
information to
guys.
cover.
Thank you guys
Thank you
for
one and all for joining us. But
logging on.
Here we go. Ready?
We're excited.
Chapter 21,
Yep.
verse 1.
Marie Sardina and Manny. Oh, you guys are both there?
Oh, good.
Good to see you guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello. Long time no see, right? So, verse 1 of chapter 21 of Exodus.
Exodus.
I know, but usually you don't put it like that.
I
think.
know, I goofed.
Oh, okay. I'm like, what? The new book in the Bible,
Okay.
the Pastor Dan's
Read
Bible.
the verse, honey.
The
Read
Exo.
read the verse, please. Please, just read
Maybe
the
we'll
verse.
trade. You read the verse. Okay. So now, these are the ordinances which you are to set before them.
Okay, and so this confuses a lot of people because, wait a minute, didn't we just, well, Gay and I spent 3 weeks going over chapter 20, which is the 10 Commandments or the 10 words or the precepts
The
that
10 suggestions. No.
the 10 precepts that are laid down by God and will be will be put on stone tablets for perpetuity. But so now chapter 21 is saying these are the ordinance. And so one commentator from Adam Clark from I think he was 18th century. Anyway, maybe not. These different regulations are remarkable for their justice and prudence as for their humanity. The great tendency is to show the valuableness of human life and the necessity of having peace and good understanding in every neighborhood, and they possess that quality which should be the object of all good and wholesome laws, the prevention of crime. So the 10 Commandments are greater precepts for a well-oiled society, if you will. Don't murder, don't steal, don't covet, respect your family. Those are general principles that circumvent all cultures. They're
Right.
applicable to all cultures.
Right.
Now, the laws or the precepts that are being given, they and again, judgments or precedents. The purpose is to guide Israel in the day-to-day functioning of a healthy society, and so we'll see that these verses kind of hone in on specific areas. But again, as we're going through these, the context is always to keep societies functioning smoothly. Okay, and we do it every day, right? We have traffic laws to help society run smoothly.
Right.
No traffic laws, chaos.
Well, and in some countries, they don't really have the same laws to the same degree for traffic, right?
And
You know,
traffic is
and
chaos.
It's very chaotic in other
Robin
some
was
countries.
referring to all the explosions.
explosions,
Yeah, there's
yes.
still lots of explosions.
We're still having
So,
random ones.
Yeah, some very rude person on the 4th of July decided it would be very fun to set off cherry bombs behind everybody's house, and you could hear them going down the block, and so that was not fun. But
Right behind our
we
house.
feel your pain, Robin.
Right.
So, verse 2.
So, if you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the 7th year he shall leave as a free man without a payment to you.
Okay, so a couple of things that must be pointed out. The scripture uses the term slave, but as we progress through these slides or these verses tonight, we all probably have a very visceral reaction to that word.
Right.
It's a despicable word. It's a despicable institution, and especially in our American culture, it causes just a gut reaction. I hate that word, and rightly so.
Right.
But as we will see as we progress tonight, the term that's used is slave, but servant, indentured servant, somebody who's paying off a debt. Those are the implications of the words that are actually used in the original Hebrew.
Right.
Slave, for clarification's sake, slavery, as most of us in America understand it, that institution could more properly be called man stealing or people stealing.
Right.
And denying them of their rights.
Or so even like kidnapping.
Kidnapping,
really, actually.
yeah.
Which is one of the laws that is covered in this section.
Yeah,
Or,
I can't even think of the word, but there's nothing equitable about the type of slavery most of us think about. This type of servitude is very different,
Right.
as we'll see. So a couple of things too. I underline the word Hebrew because these edicts are spelled out in great deal regarding Hebrew peoples, indenturing Hebrew peoples. Later on we'll see that foreigners, non-Hebrews, the same depth of regulations isn't applied, but a sense of humanity that did not exist in the surrounding cultures is applied. And that's the beauty of digging deeply into the scriptures.
So I have two things to share
Okay.
as we're starting up. So, like Dan's describing, it's not what we talked about earlier today. It's not an exact analogy, but something that I think is maybe familiar to us in modern day times because of the series. If anybody ever watched the show Downton Abbey. I was talking about how like that's just a show that a lot of people have viewed, and it shows the servants who took care of the royal family, and or if you've watched anything part of The Crown or anything like that, it's similar in that the people who were servants to the royal family were in that role by choice
Most of the time.
and they were given housing and food and meals, and then they were paid for their service, but they were servants.
Yeah.
That's the class they were in. And so it's not an exact analogy, but it's more like that. I mean, this
Similar, yeah.
this term of slavery in the Bible is more similar to that than like what we saw in Roots, or thinking about taking people out of their homes, and like African slaves, and
Yeah.
taking them out and bringing them here by force, and they have no say in the matter. That's more like kidnapping, actually.
Yeah. Pastor Tina says she emphasized people stealing.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a more proper context for the type of slavery that
Right.
we as Americans often associate with that word.
Right. And it's
And
not
then
what the Bible
glory.
is referring to here. The Bible is not referring to people stealing. It's referring to a different kind of indentured servant, or
Yeah.
serving, choosing to serve, or basically choosing to become a servant,
Now, make no mistake, we're not trying to underplay the harshness that could be associated with that social status.
Right.
But the Bible takes great pains to bring a sense of justice and humanity.
Right.
And that's a key word. It brings humanity to people that were prior to this, or in other cultures surrounding
Right.
the Hebrews, were considered nothing more than animal and or property to do with whatever you wanted. And it was often done under extremely vile conditions. And so
Right.
God is very specific about it. He understands the necessity sometimes of people entering into these relationships, if you will, or these positions. But the Bible is very explicit in saying that the humanity of the individuals is to be at the forefront of the person in the higher social status. What we would say is the master, is the terminology that's used here in the Bible.
Right. So I wanted to share from Warren Wiersbe. I like his introduction to this chapter. It is God is just, obey his laws. Justice is the practical outworking of the righteousness of God in human history. For the Lord loves righteousness and justice. You can give some references for that. Psalm 33:5, Isaiah 30:18. There may be a great deal of injustice in our world today, but the time will come when God will judge the world in righteousness by the Savior whom the world has rejected, and his judgment will be just.
Yes.
But God loves righteousness and justice. That's part of who he is and how he defines himself. And his form of justice is the practical outworking of righteousness of God in human history.
Exactly.
So
even in the second verse of this chapter, we see God imposing heretofore unheard of limits on this idea of servitude. And he said, whoever is if you purchase a Hebrew slave, that individual is only you're only allowed to hold them in servitude for 6 years.
right. So in other parts of the Bible, it talks about the year of Jubilee.
Yeah.
And in choir, we sang a song about the year of Jubilee
Right.
years ago. And that's what the year of Jubilee is, the 7th year.
Yeah,
because that's the year when all slaves had the opportunity to be set free, or to
set
leave
free.
their position of servitude.
Yeah.
And it does use the term set free, but it's leave their position of servitude and now not serve that family anymore, that role. But some people decide to stay on. So
Yeah, and
we'll get there.
as we'll see in a minute.
We'll get there.
And again, the reason we want to spend so much time with this is because even just this week, I was looking through some commentaries, and some of the comments on the commentaries and ostensibly on the scripture itself were just vile, and just maligning and mocking and trying to twist the words of scripture, which is so Satan. I mean, why are we surprised, right?
Right? Of
Why are
course
we
he's
surprised?
going to try to.
But it's so Satan to try and twist the words and say, see, the Bible, right?
The
The
Bible-
Bible is supportive of slavery. So I hope we've clearly established the fact that it's not the same type of slavery which deserved to be abolished.
Right.
Unfortunately, it still exists in the world, and some organizations such as Amnesty International say that there are more people in horrific slavery now than in any time
Right.
in recorded history.
Yeah, slavery actually exists in many countries around the world and
it's
in many
much
places.
it's as bad as it was at the time of this writing.
Right.
Okay, but this writing is applying specifically to the Hebrew peoples who themselves were coming out of 400 years
Right.
of the other type of involuntary slavery,
Right.
in the worst sense of the word.
Right.
Moses did not institute slavery in any shape. The laws concerning it were made on purpose. Catch this. The laws were made on purpose to repress it, confine it within very narrow bounds, and ultimately put an end to it. That's Charles Spurgeon said that. And he lived very close to that time period when slavery was, in fact, abolished in England. So he knows from whence he speaks.
Right.
Another way of looking at it is that there are 4 basic ways a Hebrew might become a slave or a servant to another Hebrew. In extreme poverty, they might sell their liberty.
Right.
I will serve you for X number of years to relinquish this debt that I owe.
Well, or they're just poor. I mean, poverty isn't necessarily debt. That comes
Right.
down further, I think.
I
But
have no resources.
poverty,
Yes.
they don't have the ability to care for their family and they don't have the resources, so they decide to serve another family that's more well off
Right.
because they will get food, shelter, and lodging, and their family will have a better life, or them as if they're just an individual, they'll have a better
Right.
life. They won't be striving, and then they'll have the 6 years of. In the 7th year, they'll have the opportunity to leave
To
that
be free,
position,
right.
and they could save any monies that they made.
A second option might be that a father or a family might sell a daughter as a servant into a home with the intention that she would eventually marry into that family. And sadly, that is how many modern traffickers obtain the young women that they ultimately place in the horrific sex slavery or just slavery around the world.
Right.
The promise is made because the family is destitute. They want to create a better life for their children. Who doesn't?
Right.
And so they're fed these promises that, oh no, she will get school and she'll have a place to go live and she'll be fed properly and blah blah blah, and it's all lies.
Right.
And so sadly, that's how trafficking comes. But in this case, a family may sell their daughter, hoping that she would marry into a family that she would be accepted and welcomed into, and eventually become a viable member of that family.
Right.
A third option was that in bankruptcy, a man might become a servant to his creditors.
Right. So that's a person who has had debt
Has
that they cannot
overwhelming
pay,
debt.
and so they are using the opportunity to pay off the debt.
And then fourthly, a thief that had nothing with which to make restitution. They might be sold into servitude to pay off their debt to society and to the people whom they
Whatever they stole, they can't now replace, because we'll get to that law that is telling us how much they would have to replace for what they stole.
And again, because this is such an important topic, And the idea of man stealing or people stealing and lifelong servitude, okay, often horrific servitude, the concepts many have of slavery, many, especially us here in America, simply don't apply to the practice of slavery in the Old Testament as applied to the Hebrew peoples.
Right, in this passage.
And yeah, the surrounding cultures, absolutely. But as in terms of Old Testament restrictions on servitude, we're talking about a chosen or mutually arranged term of servitude, and it was highly regulated, as we'll see. And let's jump into it.
So verse 3, if he comes alone, he shall leave alone. If he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall leave with him. That's at the time that he becomes a slave. If he's married, during the Jubilee year, they both get released if they choose. Verse 4, if his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to her master, and he shall leave alone.
Now this sounds harsh, but there's actually it's a practical reality. Is that if the entire family in this case were to leave, it could potentially throw the other family into extreme. That's the idea behind it. Okay, don't necessarily agree with it, but that's how God saw his sense of justice unfold in the culture of the day. Okay, that if a man came into servitude alone, he would leave alone. If he had a wife and child with him, they would leave with him. Okay, unheard of in the other form of slavery. Okay, but if the master chose to give the man a family, then that family rightfully belonged to the master, so-called. But as we'll see, many exceptions or arrangements could be made. Verse 5.
But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not leave as a free man, then his master shall bring him to God. Then he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him permanently.
Now notice this verse. So why would a slave say, I love my master? Okay. Well, because it's the idea of servanthood or servitude, and a relationship is established. So there's mutual respect and mutual boundaries. And the man, unlike American slavery, where fathers were just sold off and families were just destroyed, the man could say, no, I want to remain with my wife and my children. I won't leave. Mm-hmm. And then the owner, the master, would pierce his ear. In a symbolic act, he would pierce his ear. That was indicative that this individual has voluntarily chosen to stay in this household, essentially, in essence, becoming a member of the household.
Right, because Hebrew slaves were never treated as property. They were treated as family members.
Yes.
They were given many rights as family members, so they were not treated like in Downton Abbey, where they always had to be in the bottom quarters or whatever, right. The bottom half of the house and this and that. They were treated as more like proper family members, but they were working for the family. They were there serving. Now,
one of the things that we love about the Bible is that everything ties in together, mm-hmm. and everything, literally everything, points to Jesus. Everything points to Jesus. And this act of having the ear pierced undoubtedly points to Jesus. And that, of course, was not my original thought, our original thought. The commentator Meyer says, the awl represents the nail that affixed Christ to the cross. And we must expect it in every true act of consecration. Mm-hmm. So the individual voluntarily says, I align myself with my master's household. And his ear is literally pierced. In the same way, Jesus hung on that cross, and his hands and his feet were pierced, saying that I align myself with the Father. I would do the Father's will. I'm obedient to the Father. And we too, our hearts should be pierced when we confess our sin and we lay it down and we say, Jesus, take all of me.
Right.
Take all of me.
Right. It's, he was pierced for our transgressions, for
Yep.
our sins. And when we give ourselves to him, throughout our journey, we're gonna have piercings.
Oh, yeah.
Our heart's gonna be pierced. We're gonna feel conviction. We're going to have to allow our hearts to be pierced, because the alternative is for our hearts to be hardened, like Pharaoh's heart.
Right.
So there's going to be pain and suffering. I mean, it's interesting because, one of the things people who don't yet believe in Jesus and the Bible say, well, if there's a loving God, then why is there so much pain and suffering in the world? And it's because it's a fallen world, but it's
Yes.
because it's the process that even Christ went through himself in order to save us was
Right.
pain and suffering. And so following after him, our life, we know where we're going to spend eternity, and we know he will carry us through the trials and the suffering. So we can know that, we can rest assured in those promises, but we will, in our journey, walk through pain and suffering.
Right. So that piercing, that marking in the ear, and there's no indication that an earring was worn, but there would be a hole there, and that piercing would be a constant reminder that that individual was aligned with that particular household. In much the same way that a wedding ring ought to remind us that we are aligned with our spouses. Mm-hmm. So and it's a constant reminder. It should be a constant reminder that we have put our heart, given our heart to one particular individual until death do us part. Guzik brings out another aspect of this idea of having the earlobe pierced. Is that pagans had a custom of branding the slave with the name or the sign of the owner. And branding is just a horrific practice, and sadly it was practiced here in the United States during that slave period. And but Paul turns it to use a very bad pun. Paul turns it on its ear. Okay, and Paul refers to himself as such a slave in Galatians 6:17. He says, "From now on, let no one trouble me, for I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus." You see, Paul at this point had been beaten and had suffered immensely, but he did not consider it shame. He considered that the whippings and the scars on his body, the scars left from his body, as proof that he was aligned with Christ, and he was not going to relinquish his devotion to Jesus Christ.
Right. I was just remembering that Guzik had mentioned that in Greek the word is a doulos, which is the Greek word for a voluntary slave.
Voluntary slave.
But a voluntary slave,
Yeah.
which is, so that's what the Hebrew word for slave here even is, that's what it means, is that
Yeah.
voluntary slave. That's what the Bible's referring to in this
Right.
passage.
Verse 7.
Now, if a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He does not have authority to sell her to a foreign people because of his unfairness to her.
Okay, there is a lot packed in here. There's a ton of stuff packed in here.
Right.
Okay.
In the New Living Translation, it says it a little differently. It says, when a man sells his daughter as a slave, she will not be freed at the end of the 6 years as the men are. If she does not satisfy her owner, he must allow her to be bought back again. He's talking about like by her original family.
Yes.
A family member. So basically she gets to go back to her home, but he is not allowed to sell her to foreigners since he is the one who broke the contract with her. But if the slave's owner arranges for her to marry his son, he may no longer treat her as a slave, but as a daughter.
Yes, and that's it's actually a much
It's much more clear.
a much more clarifying
Yeah.
translation. So again, and this might set some of our teeth on edge because we're thinking like, well, why can't the woman go free?
Yeah.
We must always keep it in context. Women at this point in history did not have the same rights and safety net that modern 21st century women do. And this is actually a very just arrangement in the context of that society. Because if she was simply set free, she would literally have no recourse but to enter into, say, prostitution
Right.
or some other unfavorable means of trying to simply support herself.
Right. She would be lower than a slave.
Right.
Out on her own.
Yeah.
Out in society on her own. She would have less resources and less provision.
And again,
than
keeping
us.
it in the context of society at that time in history. So this is actually quite equitable to the daughter or the woman that's sold into servitude. Is, again, the intent would be that she would enter into a family and be given as a bride to one of the sons, and then
Right.
that she would be welcomed into the family and raise up in status. Okay, and this would be a way of circumventing dowries and things of that nature that perhaps a poor family could not afford.
Right.
Okay, and it's very, very specific. Let her be redeemed. If things don't work out, if the purchasing family, so to speak, does not, for whatever reasons, it doesn't work out, her biological family has the right to purchase her back. Okay, bring her back into the household. Again, keeping in mind the context of society at that time, where women were expected to be enfolded into the husband's family. Okay, and so they often did not have the ability to go back to their own biological family.
Right, because too, the underlying point culturally at this point in time, is what you're saying, is that women are considered property.
They are.
Women did not have the rights and privileges in society.
Yes.
So, this is actually God providing for Hebrew women that would be sold to a family. The idea is that this woman would become the bride of either the man of the household, if he didn't already have a wife, or
Right.
one of his sons. But again, the treatment of Hebrew slaves at this point in time by other Hebrews is that they are like family. They're
Yes.
not just like second-class citizens. They are
Exactly.
treated much better than that.
So societally, it actually is quite revolutionary
Right.
for its time frame and for the way family interactions happened in 3,000 years ago. Okay, and again, God explicitly says that the master, so-called, does not have the authority to sell her to a foreign people. So you recall how Joseph's brothers just sold him into slavery to a passing caravan? Well, the woman is afforded protections against that type of transaction happening. They can't say, look, you know what, we don't want her. Hey, look, we can make a quick buck. And God explicitly says, no, that is not allowed. Okay. Commentator Cole says that the origin of this custom, it was the same in either case, to avoid paying a higher bride price at a later age, and to rear the future daughter-in-law within the family, ensuring that she fitted in. Such an attitude to slaves abolishes slavery except in name. So the context would be that this young lady is coming into the household to become part of the household. Verse 9.
Verse 9. And if he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters.
And there are many protections afforded a betrothed woman betrothed to a son. Okay, we catch a glimmer of it even centuries later with Mary and Joseph. We see that there were protections afforded Mary even when she was wrongfully accused of getting pregnant out of wedlock. Verse 10.
Trying to say hello to Pastor Paul.
Verse 10, if he takes to himself another
There,
woman...
I did it.
Oh, okay.
if he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights.
Okay.
So yeah, that's very interesting. If they take this woman in as a slave, and then he decides to be a future wife, and then he decides, no, I want to marry this other lady. Well, she still gets the rights of a wife.
Yes. Yes.
So because that was the agreement that she came in.
Robin
with.
says, could she be taken as a second wife? That's not God's ideal.
Right.
That's what ended up happening, but that was not God's plan. God always, God, his ideal was one man, one woman, till death do they part. But society being what society is, that is in actuality what happened frequently.
Right.
But this did afford protections to a woman that was taken as a second wife or was rejected as a primary wife. She still would not be shoved into a corner to fend for herself. She
Right.
still would be provided for as a member of the household.
Right.
Oh, and I like what Cole says about the idea. Going back to verse 10, it says, he may not reduce her food. And the commentator Cole says, the word translated food should perhaps be rendered meat. It means, say the commentators, that the wife's fair share of luxuries, not mere subsistence allowance, which any slave would get. So if this woman was rejected, she wouldn't just be given the scraps, the leftovers,
Right.
the gruel. She would be entitled to the same food that the rest of the family enjoyed.
Yeah, but I think to get the complete picture about verse 10, you have to read it with verse 11,
Right.
which we haven't gotten to yet.
Which we haven't gotten to yet, but we are going to get to
Right now. Okay. So, because verse 10 in the New Living Translation says, if a man who has married a slave wife takes another wife for himself, he must not neglect the rights of the first wife to food, clothing, and sexual intimacy. Verse 11, if he fails in any of these three obligations, she may leave as a free woman without making any payment. So she doesn't have to stay on as a second wife.
Right.
She can leave as a free woman. She can go back, therefore, to her family
Right.
of origin that sold her into this
Right.
position. So, verse 10 and 11, I think adds more clarity to verse 10.
And it would not be any
the
shame
second,
to
the
her.
second wife thing does not have to happen to protect her from
Right.
society and being, out on her own.
Right.
She can freely go back to her family of origin. So this is God totally providing
Right.
for the women in the Hebrew, society that get into this position.
So we see in these first 11 verses, we see this radical addressing of people of let's say lower socioeconomic status, where in other cultures they would just be treated as animals and or property and non-humans. And
Right.
there are countless examples of that in the ancient literatures. But God is saying, no, every single individual has value and
Right.
has worth.
Right.
And you are going to adhere to my standards, not the cultural standards
Right.
around you.
So notice God never, throughout Scripture, we read, especially in Genesis, remember, we read about the different, how the patriarchs, even Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, like they had many wives, they had several wives, they had, more than one wife. But God never told them to take a second wife.
Never tells them
God
that.
never recommended multiple wives.
And God always emphasized the individuality and the personhood
Right.
of every person.
Because in the Garden of Eden, he created Adam and
Yeah.
Eve, and marriage was between one man and one woman, and sexual intimacy is between one man and one woman. So,
Right. And now, many critics of the Bible had said, well, God's, I think the word is homicidal, genocidal maniac is one of the words that I've heard, or one of the phrases
Yeah.
I've heard used in the past. Because as we'll see as we progress through the chapters, that God commands the Hebrews to ruthlessly destroy other cultures. And it's not a matter of conquest. It's a matter of destroying the sin. Sin had so permeated that culture that there were no individuals that would be would be redeemed.
Right.
It was
God
simply-
knew that their hearts were not going to turn toward him.
and we have to
So-
as much as critics hate to hear it, we have to give God credit for knowing us better than we know ourselves.
Right. He knows our hearts. So
Verse 12, now the narrative shifts slightly.
he who strikes someone so that he dies shall certainly be put to death.
Okay, that sounds very, very harsh, but if
Right.
the intent is to, and if the intent is to harm somebody to the point of death, then that individual who perpetrated the crime will also be held accountable, and they will be put to death.
So, right, this is like expounding on the sixth commandment, thou
Right.
shalt not murder.
And this principle actually goes all the way back to Genesis 9, which was like, what, 2 years ago? So, yeah, okay. Whoever sheds a man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For the image of God he made man. The right for the state to use the sword of execution is also stated in the New Testament, in Romans 13:4. So if somebody sheds blood, then the society, and again, remember, these precepts are laid down for the benefit of society. So these ideas are to be implemented by the elders and or the leaders of the peoples. Okay, Romans 13:3 says, "For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil." Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a servant of God. For it is a servant of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword. It being rulers, government. For it is a servant of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. In other words, government is given the authority to carry out judgment for the benefit of society. Exodus verse 13.
So I wanted to say, I like what Worsby says about the beginning of this section. He says, we are made in God's image, so to murder a fellow human being is to attack the image of God.
Yes.
So a person found guilty under murder on the testimony of two or more witnesses, then the murderer is killed, put to death. That's the
Yes.
punishment.
That's the punishment.
But I like that because we are all made in God's image. So by taking the life of another human being, you are essentially trying to annihilate God himself. So verse 13 says, yet if he did not lie and wait for him, but God caused him to fall into his hand, then I will appoint you a place to which he may flee. So if you accidentally kill someone, not premeditated.
Yeah, it's not premeditated.
Like
That's
you got
the
into an
key.
argument and whatever, things went too far, and then
Right.
you end up causing the death of an individual somehow, even in any kind of accident. God will appoint a place where people may flee.
Right, and Clark elaborates on that. He says, God provided the cities of refuge to which the accidental manslayer might flee till the affair was inquired into and settled by civil magistrate. Again, this didn't mean that the individual got a clean pass,
Right.
just that they would not be killed if they were able to make it to the city of refuge. Okay.
Well, and it's sort of the beginning of the concept in our judicial society today, in society being innocent until proven guilty.
It is.
Like this is the foundation for that,
Yes.
right here.
Which
in
is
Exodus.
huge and is not or is not a precedent found in most societies.
Right.
You're guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
But in our legal system, you are innocent until proven
Right.
guilty, and so you're afforded rights. And we can see the biblical origin
Right.
of these
This
rights
is why,
right here.
because this country was founded on biblical principles or by people who wanted to follow biblical principles in their lives.
Right.
And this is evidence right here.
So cities of refuge were set up so that vengeance couldn't be enacted and justice could be served and a fair hearing, for lack of a better term, could be applied to sort out the facts of the case.
Right. I like what Worsby says, because he says that, once they became in the promised land, then Israel set apart 6 cities of refuge where the manslayer could flee and be protected. Israel did not have a police force. So in the heat of anger, so it is up to the family of the victim was expected to pursue justice if they, so the
Right.
family of the victim had to pursue justice because there was no police force, right? But in the heat of anger, the family could be more interested in revenge than in justice. So the law that God created stepped in to protect the accused until he was proven guilty.
Yep.
So I like that.
So again, even the guilty, God is affording them opportunity to clarify and redeem themselves.
Right.
Verse 14.
If, however, someone is enraged against his neighbor so as to kill him in a cunning way, you are to take him even from my altar to be put to death.
All right. So
this is planned murder, not accidental.
right. And so the
Premeditated.
words are enraged. So this is an idea of somebody who is so out of control that they kill their neighbor, and they devise a clever way or a cunning way. They lie in wait for them. They push them off a bridge. They premeditate and think this through. This is indicative of somebody who had evil intent, and God is extremely harsh on these individuals. I wouldn't say harsh, but he does not give them the protections that he gives somebody who accidentally.
Right. Even if they run to the refuge altar, it says they are to be dragged away from that and put to death. So
Well,
that would be there's witnesses that saw, or somehow they know that this person
Right.
premeditated this murder.
Well, because in that society, especially later on after the altars were made, if an individual could run and place their hands on the altar,
Right.
they would, that would be sort of a sanctuary for them,
Right.
and they wouldn't be harmed. But God says, nope. If the individual was enraged and plotted and killed an individual, that is indicative of an evil heart. And even when they make because again, cunning is the key word here.
Right.
That they're like, okay, I'm going to knock her off. I'm going to run and I'll put my hands on that altar and nobody can hurt me.
Right.
Like
it's sort of like the safe, when you're playing hide and seek.
Right.
Like, I ran to home base and I'm safe. Like, no, not if you're guilty of premeditated murder.
Right.
God says no.
And again, the key phrase in this verse is cunning way, premeditated, malicious, tricky way. Okay, I think half the detective shows that were on TV are.
Yep.
That's kind of.
It's the premise.
That's the premise.
Premise for the
right.
show. A person was cunning and wicked. Okay, verse 15. And one who strikes his father or his mother shall certainly be put to death.
All right.
So this is dealing with respect your parents, honor your father and mother commandments.
It is. And again, these
The 5th commandment.
These edicts are elaborations of the 10 Commandments, and this is to help magistrates and elders to help society run smoothly. And so, if we see familial discord, and we see somebody who strikes his father or his mother, then that individual, the concept here is that they are maliciously harming their family, and so we're just going to cut this off right here.
So
What did Robin say?
Carolyn said, back to the premeditated, yes, you're correct, with malice of forethought.
Yes.
That's a phrase
Yes.
in the legal system. And you're correct. That's what the Bible's talking about there. And then Robin says, what about Cain? He was enraged, but he was banished, not killed.
That is true. God banished him, and he had a purpose for that, and that was to expand the human population.
Right.
Okay, we're dealing with several million people here. Okay, and
Right.
and the society is well established at this point in time. So, and Cain carried the marks on it, or carried some type of symbol or
Yes.
indicator for his entire life,
Right.
so that he would not be harmed, because God had a plan in Cain.
Right.
So good question,
But
Robin.
good question.
And
You're
thank
right.
you, Carolyn. Thanks for clarifying
Yes.
that. So
Yes. Malice
right.
of forethought. I like that.
Malice of
That's-
forethought.
that's
Clearly,
legal.
we have not studied law, okay? Except
We
in
need
our
to ask Jennifer Cortez.
So we need people who understand the legal terminology better
Yeah.
than we do. Guzik, so summarizing much of this is that this careful distinction between degrees of guilt and punishment in murder and the protections of the one guilty of manslaughter as opposed to murder show the sophistication and concern for justice in the principles given to Israelite judges. Okay, so why these careful elaborations and designations and distinctions? It's to help the society function smoothly.
Right.
And again, so again, keeping in mind that the Israelites have come out of 400 years of absolute slavery, in the bad sense of slavery, where they had no rights and where justice was dealt in the Egyptian way, which was incredibly harsh and immediate, and there were no protections afforded. And this was revolutionary in a cultural sense. Verse 16.
No one who kidnaps someone, whether he sells him or he is found in his possession.
Now one.
No, now one. I said no one.
Yeah.
Now, one who kidnaps someone, there we go. Whether he sells him or he is found in his possession, he shall certainly be put to death.
So this, if there was any question about God hating slavery,
Right. This is
should-
where
this
it
should
shows
answer
us.
that.
Right. God does not want anyone to be taken against their will
right?
and be forced to do anything. That's kidnapping, and that's our modern day version sometimes of
Right.
slavery happens like a kidnapping.
Absolutely.
Or happened in our unfortunately
Absolutely.
nation's history.
Absolutely.
But this is God saying that is not something He ever condones.
Now, our dear and departed friend Chuck, many of you know Chuck, okay?
Chuck Lloyd.
Chuck, he used to incessantly tell me about a pastor, missionary in Africa, who went over and he found traffickers. We would call them traffickers,
Oh, right.
witch doctors, and other individuals with malicious intent who were kidnapping children. And this particular missionary did not turn the other cheek, and he went after these guys and he ruthlessly slaughtered them.
Wow.
And he made sure that pictures were taken and that these pictures were distributed to other traffickers in the area, because he took this verse to heart. And he says, no one is allowed to kidnap other people, and I'm going to, even though it's Old Testament, I'm going to take it upon myself.
Right.
And he did that. And another individual, I think his last name is Goff. He's a lawyer. He lives here in Southern California, and he was appointed as an ambassador to an African country. I don't recall which one now.
I don't know.
But
Was
he
it
did the
Senegal?
same thing. He did the same thing. He went over, he didn't murder or kill a witch doctor, but he brought him to justice, and the state executed him. But he made sure that the execution was videoed, and the video was distributed to all of the other bad guys in the area, saying, if you take a kid, if you steal a woman, this is what you can expect.
Right. Pastor Tina said, correct. Kidnapping is, often is what
Yes.
sex trafficking
Yes.
is. Yes, today,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
And God is saying no form of kidnapping
No
is
form of
acceptable to
kidnapping.
Him.
Yeah.
The person who commits that
Yeah.
act will certainly be put to death. So
And-
not just probably or most of the time.
And that is why
Certainly.
we as Christians cannot be silent on this idea of sex trafficking. We cannot be silent. We
Right.
have to speak up whenever, wherever, however. And this is not something that we can just turn a blind eye to. It's happening here. It's happening now. It's happening all around us. And whatever we can do to stop this, we have to do it. We have to do it. So, and God clearly hates it.
Right.
He despises it.
Right.
So, kidnapping is not a property offense, since no property offense draws a capital punishment, and this law is not listed under property laws. Instead, it is theft of a human being. And it is a violation of multiple of God's commandments. And therefore, that's why we have to take it so seriously. So when people say that the Bible condones slavery, please be aware of these verses and say, absolutely not. Au contraire.
Well, and it's the idea that all people are made in God's image. All people, all human beings are made in God's image. So you are, again, committing a crime against God himself.
Yep.
By violating another human being.
Yeah, Lori. Yes, Lori. It makes God mad, furiously mad. So yes,
Correct.
We are almost out of time.
I know.
So we are going to end here because
We're going to go into injuries after this.
Yeah, we're going to go into injuries
And slaves again.
yeah. So this is a good spot for us to stop for the evening. But again, thank you so much. We know this is kind of a brutal set of verses,
Right.
Because it points out realities that we would certainly hope did not exist, but they do exist. But the key point is God cares.
Right.
God absolutely cares, and God is very explicit and exact in how He addresses the realities here. But it's the mindset of the people that makes these commandments necessary for God to elaborate on. So the Bible tells us that the heart of humanity is exceedingly wicked, and we see it playing out here. Because you would think that people who had been subjected to 400 years of slavery would be exquisitely sensitive to the idea of slavery.
Right.
And yet God has to lay down these very, very explicit and detailed regulations, if you will, against slavery because the heart of man
It's wicked.
is wicked.
Right, and it always wants to be in power over another human being.
Yeah.
I mean, often, so Jesus is our model. He served with humility.
Yes.
The humbleness of Christ it's not in our sin nature, our human nature, to be humble like that.
Right.
But with the Holy Spirit, we can learn to be more humble, but He's our example because it's not our nature.
So we don't want to end on a down note. So keep in mind that if God is so detailed in these edicts and these regulations, it's because He cares.
Right.
He cares about the individual. And He literally is turning the world of that time and henceforth on its head. And so we can take great solace in that. God hears the kidnapped. He hears the trafficked. He hears the individual that is in excruciating servitude. He hears them.
Right.
He hears them.
If
I don't have an answer as to why He just doesn't set them free immediately. I don't know the answer to that question. None of us do. But God hears us. And that's, we have to end on that. So we are done for tonight. We will continue. We'll pick up in verse 18 next week.
Right.
And we will see you all
If
then.
you can, go on to, I'm looking for it right now, 146 Church YouTube channel, because that's the church that allows us to do all these wonderful Bible studies online.
And remember, it's 14 SIX Church.
Yes, if you go onto that and subscribe, we need to get 100 subscribers.
Yeah.
So, and our YouTube channel as well, which is Foundations in Creation /242 Ministries. Once we all get 100 subscribers to our channel, that allows us to do a few more things as far as making it easier to find for other people and things like that. And 146 Church, which was Lighthouse Church, and we've been affiliated with them for a few years now, and they're just wonderful, wonderful pastors that lead that church. Paul and Tina Karnick, and their family just serves at that church, and it's an amazing group of people that just have a heart for getting the truth of the gospel and the love of Christ out to this world that's broken and lost and hurting.
Yep.
So we fully want you guys to go to their YouTube channel and subscribe. If you scroll down on Bible Discovery Group here, they have a post there that has the link to the YouTube channel.
There you go.
Okay.
See you all next week. Blessings.
Thank you. Bye-bye.